Hello, and welcome to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we will turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. First, we would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Experian. Our sponsors are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booth from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active on social media, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum. Also, be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I would like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we have curated based on the feedback we have received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us today. Now, let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Demetria Johnson, D&I Early Career Partner for the Americas, Genentech, a member of Roche. We are excited to have Demetria for her opening keynote presentation titled Strong Starts, Supporting Diverse Early in-Career Talent. Welcome, Demetria. Over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. I hope that you are ready to dive into D&I and learn how you as an organization and as individuals can support diverse early in career talent. So let's get started. A few of the discussion points that we'll cover today: build support across the enterprise, leads to actions to build credibility, and leads to connecting with your future talent. We know that D&I is certainly not a new concept in the business world. From going back to the protest of summer 2020, it shined a bright light on many of the racial and gendered inequities in our society and highlighted the need to carefully consider how diversity, equity, and inclusion are navigated in the world of work. So we'll have you look at these three different components and hope that you'll be able to build and support diverse early in career talent and your employees. So to get started, I'm going to do a quick chat. So if you could utilize the chat feature, and the question has been placed there already, but how many of you are actively involved in attracting, recruiting early in career talent? Good. Great. Excellent. Well, thank you. It's good to see that we have a robust group of individuals who are in this space, along with myself. So thank you all. So let's get started. Let's jump right in. We want to build support across your enterprise. Building support across your enterprise, we want to be intentional and transparent. What does intentional mean? We want to lead with authenticity, and we want to be transparent as we cultivate the talent that we have in our organization, but also those that we are looking to hire from early in career. In many conversations in my role with diverse talent, one of the things that they highlight to me is intentionality and transparency with organizations. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Here's a quote that I like from Pat Waters, who's head of HR for LinkedIn. When we listen and celebrate what's common and different, we become a wiser, more inclusive, and better organization. So these next slides that I'm going to share with you will take you through a little bit of digesting into what is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, so that we can set the tone before we jump into more about how to recruit and attract diverse early in career talent. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, and along with belonging. As we know, diversity is defined as any dimension that can be used to differentiate groups from one another, which makes us unique. It's the understanding and appreciation of differences in thoughts, culture, race, ethnicity, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, national origin, religion, education, veteran, disability, or socioeconomic status. Equity recognizes that barriers and disadvantages exist. Achieving equity means that we have taken steps to ensure that everyone has equal access to the same opportunities. Inclusion is the involvement and empowerment of diverse employees in the company. It's the creation of a workplace where all employees are valued, respected, and supported to contribute to the overall success of the company. Belonging, the safety of knowing that you can show your differences and not be judged, perceived in a negative way for doing so. Excuse me. Belonging is good for business. We know that when you have belonging, you see a 56% increase in job performance, a 50% decrease in turnover risk, and a 75% reduction in sick days. Inclusion was the next big moment, with an emphasis on ensuring that employees from diverse backgrounds are plugged into the organization in terms of networking, opportunities, promotions, leadership. But still, employees can feel they have access to what their company has to offer without feeling that they're truly meant to be there. We can focus on belonging, feeling safe in the workplace, knowing the differences without being marginalized. And by building a culture of belonging, underrepresented employees can feel more at home in their workplace. It's creating a space of psychological safety. Now, the diversity wheel is a mix of, as they say, human similarities. This was adapted from an article by Lee Gardenwitz and Anita Rowe. There's 4 layers to diversity. The core dimension is how we think and communicate. Core makes you who you are. Internal dimensions are largely out of our control, but have a powerful impact on behaviors and attitudes. External dimensions are largely defined within our control, and our choices formed by environmental, social, cultural factors and experiences. And then organizational dimensions are largely defined and influenced by the group or organization in which we work. So looking at organizational dimensions, it talks about job classifications, divisions, seniority, work contact, functional level. But when you look at internal dimensions that go closer into our thinking style, it deals with gender, race, national ethnicity, and sexual orientation. When we look at this, the primary things are the things that we cannot change. So there are different ways to define psychological safety. And I like looking at this diversity wheel to talk a little bit about that, because psychological safety is the definition of where you can feel like you can be yourself. In simpler terms, it's the ability to speak up without fear. So when recruiting diverse early in career talent, and even experienced talent, it's an integral part of an organization to be able to ensure that people can speak up without fear and they can be their authentic self. I love this slide, and even though McKinsey wrote diversity, what's happening in diversity back in 2020, it is still relevant at this time. Companies with greater ethnic and cultural diversity were 36% more likely to experience above average profitability compared to their counterparts. When we look at this, we think, why focus on D&I? This seems like an obvious question for many organizations, as it's no longer necessary, they feel, to create a business case for driving D&I, but it's important to ground yourselves in the why to ensure that your DE&I initiatives are merely not a checkbox activity. And remember that piece, not a checkbox activity as it relates to the hiring of Gen Z, as I talk about in the next few slides. So we want to also say that there are many reasons that D&I cannot be ignored as business leaders. As stated in a Harvard Business Review, ensuring people from underrepresented communities are recruited and advanced is far more beneficial for an organization than any one individual. Diversity, equity, and inclusion attempts to level the playing field to allow the best ideas to flourish, connect talented individuals from underrepresented backgrounds with opportunities that those in the majority often have unfair access to. And one of the things that I say as the D&I professional is that when we're looking for talent, we're looking for the best talent, but we want to ensure there is equity across that field. Representation matters. Gen Z is the most ethnically and racially diverse generation in history. 1 in 4 is Hispanic, 14% are African American, and 6% are Asian, according to studies led by Pew Research Center. And their views on gender and identity are unprecedented and untraditional. Gen Z refuses to turn ethnicity and race into checkboxes on a survey form. So as I mentioned before in the previous slide, how organizations oftentimes look at diversity as a check the box. Gen Z refuses to turn ethnicity and race into checkboxes on that survey form. Compared to Gen Z is compared to 32% of millennials, 28% of Generation X, and 21% of baby boomers who identify as the same as racially diverse. Gen Z has arrived replete with a set of stereotypes and generalization. Gen Zers are tech dependent. They want to experience new adventures, not just to buy things, and they're less loyal to brands as their first digitally native generation. It's touted that they prefer digital communication to avoid face-to-face interaction. They're harder to reach because of their short attention span and they're focused on authenticity and a brand. Yet companies and organizations would be wise not to fall for the myths and the stereotypes. When you're talking about gender and ethnicity or modes of learning, Gen Z refuses to fit into neat little boxes. So let's take a minute to do one more chat. How are you encouraging stakeholders within your organization to be a part of the solution and not the problem? And if you place in your answers in the chat, and then we may have an opportunity at the end to come back and revisit this question, but it also will help to add some best practices to your colleagues who are here as well. So again, how are you encouraging stakeholders within your organization to be a part of the solution and not the problem? Excellent. Thanks for putting those questions in the chat. All right, let's move on. Take bold action. This seems like an obvious statement for many organizations, and some may feel that it's not necessary any longer to create a business case for driving DE&I. But it's important to ground ourselves in the why to ensure that DEI initiatives are not merely a check the box. And the first answer is, again, because it is the right thing to do. There are many reasons that D&I cannot be ignored as business leaders, and business leaders drive the efforts of their organization in DE&I. I always say that it should be a conversation that's had in every business meeting and every conversation with your leadership team, with your middle managers. DE&I should be embedded in each of the conversations that you have so that your peers, your colleagues know the importance as you go about recruiting diverse early in career talent and diverse experience talent. Companies with gender, ethnic, and or cultural diversity, as I said, were 36% more likely to experience above average profitability compared to their counterparts. Now, companies need a systemic business-led approach to inclusion and diversity, as well as, I said, bolder action on inclusion. Systemic business-led approach to inclusion and diversity, bold steps to strengthen inclusion, increasing the representation, particularly in leadership and critical roles. Ensure the representation of diverse talent. There is still an essential driver of inclusion. Companies should focus on advancing diverse talent into executive management, technical, and board roles. They should ensure that a robust I&D case designed for individual companies is well accepted and think seriously about which forms of diversity to prioritize. For example, going beyond gender and ethnicity, they also need to set the right data-driven targets for the representation of diverse talent. Strengthening your leadership skills, accountability for delivering on I&D goals, enable equality of opportunity through fairness and transparency. Advance toward a true critical role for companies to ensure a level playing field and advancement and opportunity. You should deploy analytic tools that show that promotions, pay processes, and the criteria behind them are transparent and fair, and strive to meet your targets in the long-term workforce plan, finding that equality within pay and recognition. Promote openness, tackling bias and discrimination. Openness among companies should uphold a zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior, such as bullying and harassment. Ask leaders and employees to assess each other on how they are living up to that standard. That can take effects into ensuring that you're having the proper training to tackle the bias, also microaggressions. And then the last, foster belonging through support. Fostering belonging through support for companies to build a culture where all employees feel they can bring their authentic selves to work. Managers should communicate and visibly embrace their commitment to the forms of diversity, building a connection to a wide range of people, and supporting employee resource groups. And now, as we go into the next few slides, we'll hear a little bit more about how the importance of driving support and engagement with your employee resource groups helps to foster a community of belonging, especially with talent. Oops, skip too fast. So connecting with early and career talent. Here, we'll talk about the best ways that you as an organization can connect with talent. There was a study done through Delivering Through Diversity and McKinsey, and they talked about that ethnically and racially diverse companies, as I said, build higher profits, but they also showed that these companies outperform the national average by almost 33%. They also showed that the higher one ascends in a company's ladder, the most that diversity drops. Needless to say, many companies seem to have missed that link between diversity and company performance. So that is one of the reasons that it's important that you as a company talk openly, as I mentioned before, and transparent about what you're doing as an organization to increase diversity. So let's talk about what matters to early talent. Importance of EVP, benefits, work-life balance, and inclusive culture are among some of the top. As seen here, Black and Hispanic Latinx women are most strongly influenced by perceptions of DE&I when evaluating employer appeal. You look at here how women rate almost 31% of Black or African American women the importance of DE&I. And when you talk about employer attributes, this is talking about your employer brand, the appeal that you have on the early and career talent. Students most often utilize LinkedIn, career fairs, and info sessions to learn about career advancement. The benefit of career fairs and webinars is instrumental and adds such value to your organization. Having webinars to breakout sessions, developing relationships, working across student groups is most helpful in aligning the external candidates with your values and your brand. As you can see here, that LinkedIn rates high next to career fair or info sessions and employer websites. Alumni from the employer at these different events, and Handshake. Handshake is a platform that is used by talent acquisition professionals to help showcase the value EVP of your organization, but it's also a way to connect with the talent through their schools, informing them about campaigns and events you have. I would say that in my experience, that working with Handshake career fairs has helped to bring a more proactive approach to our recruitment of early and career talent. And one of the things that I'll tell you a quick story is that there was a webinar that we held for one of the business groups that wanted to showcase their area of non-science within our organization and to share more about the value of the organization, our EVP. And when we utilized our resources through Handshake, we saw an increase of attendance at our webinars. So previously, we may have had like 50 students show up for webinars. Our last webinar had 300 students sign up, which resulted in 25 hires across the organization. So I'd say that's a great use of utilizing your brand and utilizing the resources that you have, such as Handshake, career fairs, and even we promoted it on LinkedIn. Another area that students are interested in, skills for development and growth, on-the-job development and training, long-term earning potentials, networking opportunities, mentoring opportunities, and then also financial support for their postgraduate education. Looking at compensation is key. And this is based on a study by Veris Insights, which is a university recruitment analytical think tank. And so when you see here some of the testimonials from some of the individuals that they interviewed, the company is so much into the growth mindset, they really are saying, are you sure you have no more questions? They want you to keep asking and keep learning. Having training is something that Gen Z and our millennials are really interested in. And compensation, as I mentioned, work-life balance, advancement opportunities, those are the things that are influential on a student decision-making. company benefits, work-life balance, career advancement, culture and coworkers, the job stability, mission and impact. And even though diversity and equity and inclusion, you may think, are at the end of this spectrum, they still are very interested. And as I mentioned before, they're not into a check the box mentality for organizations. And then, of course, flexible work arrangements, paid time off, looking at going from in-person to hybrid. That has changed a lot of the focus and for our proactive early talent and recruiting proactively for early and career talent. Our organization went back to 90% of our interns were on site this year. And then, as I mentioned, representation and leadership and diversity beyond simple demographics. The next group of early and career talent is very interested in seeing who looks like me in an organization. And that helps to drive their interest in your organization when they can see leaders such as themselves. And this is just some of the channels that you can use to learn about DE&I and where the talent is. LinkedIn, as we said, career fair, employer websites, networking sessions, and also your surveys on Glassdoor. So I wanted to give you and close with a few steps to committing to DE&I early and career strategy. Ensure your brand speaks to inclusivity. Be an ally for underrepresented communities. Remove the systematic barriers to entry. Commit to equity. Enlist the support of your employee resource groups. Don't boil the ocean. You can't do all. I say it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And then use DEI metrics to tell your story. Be the cultural architect of your workplace. It means creating a pattern of thought or behavior, and a person is a habit. A pattern of thought or behavior in a team is a norm, and a collection of norms in an organization creates a culture. No one would really want to join a workforce where the culture is toxic enough to destroy employee morale. But it is easy to determine if a workplace is toxic and lacks psychological safety. So be that architect, be that person that changes the norm. And our last chat, something for you to think about. As HR leaders, what will you do to create a path of success for early and career talent? And then last, what's trending? Recruitment and ongoing retention policies that focus on representation at every level. Careful assessment of pay gaps based on data, and policy for rectifying gaps in earnings go to equity. Commitment by top executives to create an actively anti-racist workplace. Company policies and business practices. And then philanthropic contributions. Gen Zers are really interested in how we're giving back to the community. So thank you. And now we have Q&A. Nick?
Great. Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Demetria. We only have time for maybe one question, but here's one from the audience. What have you found to work for what they called the COVID-19 skills gap, for when many students didn't get to build the valuable skills they need to succeed in the workforce?
That's a good question. So one of the things that we've found is continually to hold trainings. So it's the valuable skills to the students as they're looking for their internships is hosting interview resume workshops, hosting interview skills workshops as part of your webinar outreach. We've had breakout sessions over our open house. If we have an open house and we talk holistically about the organization, We also drilled down and have managers come to speak about some of the tactical skills that I think were of value to students during the time when we had the COVID-19 that affected a lot of individuals in the workforce. But those skills are things that they need, and ongoing training for your employees that are in the workforce is another key factor. That didn't change as much as long as you are able to build your professional development.
Great. Well, thank you again, Demetria, for an excellent keynote. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.